The first of two coronal holes is finally rotated into the Earth's strike zone, and it could be bringing us some aurora. And we have some storms on the backside. Those stories and more in the news this week. Space weather this week really picks up. We finally have the first of two coronal holes that is rotating into the Earth's strike zone now. Now, this is not a huge pocket of fast wind we're going to get from this coronal hole because the hole itself is reasonably small, but it might be enough to give us some aurora at high latitudes over the next day or so. Then on top of that, we have a second finger-like coronal hole that's going to be rotating into the Earth's strike zone here starting around the 10th and the 11th, so it could give us another dose of fast wind and some more aurora. Now, this aurora might actually reach down to mid-latitudes. The Earth doesn't really like to be hit like a 1-2 punch, so it could give us a better chance for aurora, so you aurora photographers stay on your toes. Now, on top of that, we do have these two coronal holes sandwiching this bright region, which unfortunately has not been bright enough to boost the solar flux up enough to give us a decent radio propagation for you amateur radio operators, shortwave, and emergency responders. So you're just going to have to continue dealing with that until some bright regions rotate back into Earth view in about 10 to 12 days. Switching to our M-flare threat meter, you can see the last time we actually had any flare activity was back around the 25th. Since then, the activity is completely tanked, the X-ray flux has dropped off the map, and by proxy, so has the solar flux. This means we are back into poor conditions for radio propagation, and it's been like that easily over this past week as we basically have a spotless sun right now. And this, unfortunately, is going to continue easily for the next 10 to maybe 12 days until the active regions that are on the sun's backside rotate back into Earth view. Switching to your solar storm conditions, you can see the last time we actually had a decent solar storm was back on the 26th, and this was from that massive but incredibly slow solar storm that just lingered and lingered over Earth for easily a day before finally beginning to move through, and it brought us some gorgeous aurora all around the world. Now, I promise this time that I bring you some more aurora photos, and I will show some a little bit later. Now, since then, things have calmed down to about unsettled conditions. We did pop up to active conditions back on the 5th momentarily due to some disturbed solar wind that was kind of to the west of the fast wind that we're beginning to feel the effects of now. So things are beginning to ramp up again. We're at unsettled conditions, and we might even pop up to active conditions yet again over the next day or so before calming a little bit. And then once again, on the 10th or the 11th, we should pop back up easily to active conditions, maybe even storm conditions if everything works out right. But it won't take very long because things will calm back down after that, and then we'll have some pretty smooth sailing. Now, during this massive solar storm that we had just recently, I wasn't able to show nearly half of the amazing photos that was sent in to me by you aurora photographers from all over the world. So as promised, I'm showing more today, along with some gorgeous time lapses. So let's start with some beautiful coronas in Norway. And we had many shots taken in Sweden. And we had some peekaboo aurora in Denmark. And as we cross the Atlantic, we see some gorgeous aurora in Iceland. And in the Western Hemisphere, it was seen in the Yukon and in New Brunswick, Canada, and in Saskatchewan. And as we dip down into the United States, aurora was seen, of course, in Alaska and in New Hampshire. And it was seen in many places in Michigan. It was seen in Wisconsin and also in Montana. And as we go down south, the aurora australis was seen in multiple places in New Zealand. So what else does the sun have in store for us this week? Well, this is stereo A. It's our backside monitor. You can see here's Earth, here's the sun, and here's stereo A staring at the sun from behind. And you see that bright region on the west limb of Stereo's view? That's the bright region that has rotated into Earth view and is giving us a tiny boost to the solar flux right now, but not very much. But if you look at the east limb in Stereo's view, that's the side of the sun closest to me. You can see the bright regions there on the limb. Those were the regions that had rotated out of Earth view back at the end of last month. And if you look very closely, they are firing solar storms. So they're still incredibly active, which is really good news. So we will be watching these regions as they rotate through Stereo's view. They could be reaching Earth again and coming back into Earth view in about 10 to 12 days. So if they're still extremely active, they could actually boost the solar flux back up. Plus, we have a small finger-like coronal hole that's also on the sun's backside, and that could bring us, in another couple weeks, another chance for aurora. Switching to your solar storm conditions and aurora possibilities over the coming week, we are anticipating the hit from that fast wind from the first of two coronal holes that will be rotating into the Earth strike zone this week. At high latitudes, NOAA is expecting active conditions with about a 40% chance of a major storm. At mid-latitudes, we're only expecting unsettled conditions, but we could get about a 10% chance of a minor storm if we're lucky. Now, these conditions should only last for a day or so before things begin to settle down right around the end of the weekend, and then things should pick back up again as the second of two coronal holes rotates into the Earth strike zone and sends us yet more fast wind. And because the Earth shield's already a little bit rattled at that point, we do have a little bit better chance of some solar storming. At high latitudes, we probably could reach storm conditions. At mid-latitudes, it's not quite so clear, but we could get aurora. So your aurora photographers definitely, despite it being solar minimum, you have something to smile about. Switching to your solar flare and particle radiation storm outlook over the coming week, everything is still in the green when it comes to solar flares. We have a spotless sun, so there's no risk for radio blackouts, and that should make GPS users, at least on Earth's dayside, quite happy. Now, unfortunately, this does mean the solar flux remains low. We are still in the 60s, and this is poor conditions for radio propagation, so you shortwave, amateur radio, and emergency responders, you guys, I'm sorry, but you're still going to be dealing with some very low propagation here over the next week and possibly 2 weeks before we get a reprieve. Now, it's also solar minimum, so that does mean that the cosmic rays are penetrating a bit more intensely than they normally would. So frequent flyers, and that includes aircrew, if you're flying more than about 800 hours annually and you're flying at high latitudes and high altitudes, you are at marginal risk for radiation dose right now. So please take this into consideration in your flight plans. So the space weather this week has gotten really exciting. We finally have the first of two coronal holes that has rotated into the Earth strike zone, and we're beginning to feel its effects just now. So aurora photographers, you're going to get a chance for some aurora, especially at high latitudes. Things then might settle down for a day or two near the end of the weekend and then pick back up as the second of two coronal holes rotates into the Earth strike zone and sends us yet more fast wind. And between these two chances, we might actually get aurora down to mid-latitudes, which should keep you aurora photographers very happy. Now, shortwave and amateur radio operators and emergency responders, well, things aren't looking so great for you. We do have a bright region that is on the Earth-facing disk right now, but it hasn't done much to boost the solar flux, and unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's going to anytime soon. And on top of that, we don't have any new bright regions that are going to be rotating into Earth view easily for the next almost 2 weeks. So it's going to be a while before we get some decent radio propagation again. And I know Hurricane Florence is on everyone's mind. And if that makes landfall during one of these solar storms, then most likely radio propagation is going to be better on Earth's day side, not on Earth's night side. Now, as far as GPS users are concerned, well, things should look reasonably decent for you, and as long as you stay away from the aurora and away from the dawn dust terminators during these solar storms, your reception should look pretty good. I'm Tamitha Scove. Thank you for watching.